Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And the other day, I ran across this old Verizon brochure back when I used to sell Verizon, and we had to get with the reps. And for those of you who remember the old brochure, pretty much for all the carriers were always like really thick. And this was back in the days where 3G networks were really still a thing, especially with Sprint. HSPA was still largely deployed for AT&T and T-Mobile. This was back when Cricket had its own network. And back then, this is when Verizon was the best absolute network, clear cut and dry across the US, every county, every city. Verizon was able to give you the best absolute performing network at that time. Like literally, there was not a more consistent performing network across the US besides Verizon. It was the other carriers, it was a very inconsistent performance. T-Mobile was transitioning from HSPA 21 to 42, so that was kind of a drop off. AT&T was primarily just HSPA 21. Sprint had 3G. That wasn't really a network for data intensive tasks to begin with. Cricket really didn't have a nationwide scaled network. They were largely also 3G. So this was when Verizon really shined. This is when Verizon got the perception that they got today. This is where they were the absolute best network. If you wanted a data experience as we all transitioned to LTE, if you wanted your apps to load at the time, music, video streams, whatever, Verizon was the go-to network, hands down, by far. Literally. It wasn't even close. I remember the cell reps were making a ton of money back then. I remember them using that to their advantage. They would tell you as you walked into a mall, whatever, small business, whatever, they would come up to you and say, "Hey, look, pull up this video on your phone. I'll pull it up on my phone, and I'll show you how much quicker it loads on our network." That's how it would go. That was the easiest selling time for Verizon's network ever. And it was literally like that. I would see it like they would come up with like one of the droids and they would play a video and it would load quickly. It would play. And on my Sprint 3G connection, it was just buffering, go a little bit, buffer. And by the time I got to like 10 seconds in, the Verizon video was already finished. I mean, it was really the next gen network. Calling was by far the best. Texting was by far the best. Even Root, when they were testing the networks back then, I mean, Verizon would win every market by a landslide, and the other networks were ranking like super low. There was no competitiveness on the networking side back then at all. It was 100% Verizon. If you wanted to do anything data-wise, you had to be with Verizon at that time. And this was just right around the time when Verizon was transitioning from the truly unlimited to the gig plans, for those of you who remember that. So the network was monitored in a big way because of the gig usage. They didn't have unlimited, so it was just a flawless network experience across the board. I remember getting a employee line with Verizon. It's like 50% off, testing it, and it was just like, man, I was getting like 40-50 megabits down just about anywhere I went, and that was big back then. That was a huge deal. That was quick, fast. None of the other carriers were able to get anywhere close. On a good day with Sprint, if the tower was empty early mornings, you would get like 2 megabits on 3G. They weren't even fully transitioning to LTE back then, but they made you pay $10 extra. For those of you who remember, $10 extra for a smartphone for 4G LTE when they didn't even have it deployed. So this was Verizon's peak, in my opinion. This is when they peaked. This is when they transitioned to a technology that no one else had committed at the time. T-Mobile was still getting over the failed merger with AT&T. AT&T was still getting over the failed merger with T-Mobile. And nobody was really committing to LTE. T-Mobile really didn't commit to LTE until John got there. AT&T got started with that shortly after. They started deploying 2 carriers of LTE, but Verizon was far ahead of anyone. And then they added AWS and the experience got better. We started seeing like 70, 80 megabits per second on sites. They started densifying. So they were the network to be on. I would say even like 2014-ish, 2015-ish, Verizon was still the network to be on when it came to data intensive tasks and stuff and consistency. T-Mobile was still transitioning at that time to LTE. Although they were claiming all these pops, a lot of those markets were still like a quarter of the towers were still HSPA only. They had no low band. I mean, Verizon was really back then the network to be on for the experience that you wanted. Now it's more competitive. Now everybody has low band. Now everybody has mid band. T-Mobile has densified since then. They've added all the newer technologies. I mean, the networks are now closer and more competitive than they've ever been. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you remember this. This was a great time to be in the wireless industry as well. It was competitive from a pricing standpoint back then already. Sprint was selling unlimited. T-Mobile started pushing unlimited. It was a great time and very interesting one from a networking perspective because everyone was transitioning to something else. Sprint was doing WiMAX. That failed. And so they largely remained 3G, and Verizon was really pushing the LTE technology. So make sure you stay tuned for more. Like, share, subscribe if you're new. Follow my social media outlets. This is Tyrone with Tech Life. See y'all in the next one. Peace.